Hey, we're in chapter 6, and I'm just going to go ahead and get started here. Um, Isaiah called to be a prophet. First one. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Um, by the way, this is only 13 verses, but there is a lot of info in here. Basically, um, just in chapter 1, I've got a lot of notes, or verse 1. So, um, so he's talking about the year King Uzziah died. That was about 740 BC. Um, and King Uzziah died from leprosy. So he was trying to take over the priest duties, the high priest duties. Only Aaron's sons were consecrated to be priests, and only they could go into the holy place in the temple and do the incense and the sacrificial type things. And he went in to burn incense to God on the altar, and he wasn't consecrated to do that. And so they tried to chase him down, um, and only the sons of Aaron were consecrated to do that. And so, anyway, God made him leprous, and he was until he died. All right, he reigned 52 years. He developed a water system to enlarge their agricultural area over the Philistines, which had never been done before. So he was extremely prosperous. He was very popular, and he started his reign at the age of 16. So he reigned 52 years, which is a long time then. So basically, what's going on here is Isaiah is dead, and Isaiah thinks the throne is empty. Um, so he's pretty brought down by this. And the Northern Kingdom at this time is like an anarchy. Um, every king that they get is being murdered. So they're going down the tubes big time. And so um, he talks about God's throne fills the temple, his train. All right. We talked about the Shekinah glory before. And so the Shekinah glory, the smoke of God's train filling the temple. Um, this could also be talking about the hem of God's garment, and the root word for train is shul, Shul, and it's got the little triangle above the U. So it's equivalent to the word hem. And the hem of someone's garment in the ancient world, if you were to tear or strip the hem from someone's garment, you stripped them of their personality, their authority. You cut that off from them. It was very, very serious. So it's like the bottom edge of their robe. Serious matter. Okay, so um, a husband could divorce his wife by cutting off the hem of her robe. And so this is what we're talking about, God's train filling the temple, his hem, his garment, okay? Um, so a husband could divorce his wife by cutting off the hem of her robe. Um, if you remember the story about David, when Saul was in the cave and he cut the hem of his garment off, he was cutting off his genealogy, basically. So he later on repented for that. But um, the woman of blood, which is one of my favorite stories. And there's a nugget here. Okay, so the woman of blood, when she touched the hem of Jesus's garment, um, and she was healed. And she had a blood issue for 12 years. So there's a little thing here, and I'll go through it with you. So she had an issue of blood for 12 years. Jesus was on his way to save Jairus' daughter, who was 12 years old. So um, we know the woman was a Gentile because she had an issue of blood, and had she been a Jew, she would have been unclean. She would have not been in the group. So we know that she was a Gentile. Um, so the Holy Spirit basically ties all this up for you, okay? So we know Jairus' daughter was 12, and so basically Jesus was on his way to save the Jew, which was Israel. Um, and on his way, he saved the Gentile. So that is another little thing about the woman with the issue of blood. So I'd never thought about it that way until I read that, but it makes perfect sense. So um, on his way to save the Jew, he saves the Gentile, and that's what where we fall in. Okay, so um, we talked about the woman with the issue of blood, and it's also the hem of his garment stands for God's covering over Israel, and he says, "I will spread my shul over thee." In Ezekiel 16 and Exodus 39. So another example here of the hem that we're talking about is Jesus' robe would not tear when the Roman soldiers tried. And that's because Jesus' robe and the hem of his garment represented his priesthood, and it is without end. So it wouldn't tear when they tried to tear it. All right. Another example of this is when Ruth had Boaz when she went into the barn, and when I think they were threshing wheat. I can't remember, but it's been a while since I read Ruth. But it's an awesome book. If you haven't read it and you really dig into it, it's awesome. Lots of nuggets in there. But I'll give you one today. So Ruth has Boaz put the hem of his garment over her. So he was acting as her kinsman redeemer. And if you don't know a lot about the kinsman redeemer in their time, basically what it was is it was a person, the next of kin person in the family, that was able to buy back or redeem land that had been purchased by someone else. Because in that time, if you purchased somebody else's land, family heritage, then you didn't really get the title to the land. You just got to use it until someone purchased it back. The kinsman redeemer or the family redeemer. Okay, so and a lot of times on the transaction, there would be a scroll with the transactions in it, and on the back side of the scroll, there would be instructions for the kinsman redeemer and what they had to do to redeem that land. All right, so this also worked with slavery. Someone was sold into slavery, the next of kin, their kinsman redeemer could um, redeem them, purchase them back. In Ruth's case, she needed a husband as a kinsman redeemer for her family. So how that worked is Naomi's son, who was Ruth's husband, died, and Ruth didn't have any kids. So the laws of a Levirate marriage means that for her, basically, the next of kin, which is usually the brother, okay, because lever of Levirate marriage, lever means brother. Usually the next of kin, the brother, would marry the widowed woman so that she could have kids and continue on the family name. Wouldn't be a disgrace, okay? So we see that in the book of Ruth where Boaz puts his hem over Ruth, basically like he's accepting her as the kinsman redeemer. And let's see, what notes do I have written down here? So, all right, so in Revelation 5, we notice that the scroll that the angel's talking about is, it says it is written within and on the backside. So that tells us that it is a transaction that is able to be redeemed by the kinsman, okay, because it's got writing on the backside, instruction. So when Jesus, when the angel says who's worthy to open up the seals on the scroll, or Jesus is the only one worthy because he's our sacrificial lamb, and Jesus is our kinsman redeemer. So, and how that works out is he is the kinsman of Adam, and he purchased us with his blood. He is our kinsman redeemer, and he is the avenger of blood, and we'll get into that at some point, maybe in Revelation. that a lot of people see Jesus not as coming back like he is, and he's coming back with a vengeance. Okay, he's the avenger of blood, and so he is the kinsman of Adam because he had already purchased us with his blood as the sacrificial lamb. He not only purchased the land, but he's there to redeem the bride also because he purchased her as well, which is the church. Okay, so in the book of Ruth, if you've ever read it, Naomi stands for Israel, and she's exiled from her land. Um, Boaz obviously is the kinsman redeemer, Jesus, and Ruth is obviously the bride who is purchased. The Gentile bride, Ruth, is purchased with the land, so who is the church? Okay. So, and I just kind of had a definition written down here of Levirate marriage. Um, Usually the next of kin, the brother. I already mentioned that, okay? So, we'll move on here. I just thought that was interesting. So, definitely, if you know the ancient ways back then, it definitely gives you a different perspective of kind of what's happening and what goes on. So, okay, verse 2. Above it stood seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And so, seraphim, this is the only place in the Bible that it talks about seraphim. And they talk about cherubim, and a lot of people want to associate them together. They are similar, they're described similar, but they do have some differences. So basically, what Isaiah is, he's having a vision here. In the vision, he is seeing God's throne, and above his throne are these seraphim, these angelic creatures. Ezekiel also describes them. He calls them cherubim, though. They have 6 wings. You can't really say if they're the same or not, all right, because we don't know. We just know their descriptions. John calls them living creatures. So anyway, 2 wings cover their face, 2 their feet, and 2 they fly with. So basically, in a nutshell, this is their ministry is worship, and they stand around God's throne worshiping. All right. So verse 3, and one cried to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. So basically, like I said, this is their ministry. They worship God, and they are leading and worshiping God from around his throne. They continually proclaim, Holy, holy, holy. They continually proclaim God's holiness. All right. So that is their ministry. They worship and they lead worship. And you could ask yourself this, why 3 holies? Holy, holy, holy. It's interesting. It could represent the Trinity. Don't know. But anywho, they say it 3 times. So verse 4, and the posts of the door were shaken by the voice of him who cried out, and the house was filled with smoke. So these creatures were so powerful, their singing was so powerful that they shook the temple. That's powerful. All right, that's loud. Even me with my hearing problem, I can still hear it. So, okay, verse 5. So I said, Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Okay, so Isaiah here is recognizing the gap between him and the righteousness of God and his sinfulness, and he's crushed. He's saying, Woe is me, and for I am a man of unclean lips. And I know that I would probably be in the same position. I obviously have issues with my unclean lips. It's something that I struggle with all the time. Um, but yeah, I definitely would be in the same position. The gap between you and the Creator of the universe and His holiness. So, so that's what he's talking about here. Is I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King of the Lord of hosts. So, verse 6. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having his hand a live coal which he had taken with the tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth with it, and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away, and your sin purged. So basically, we know from Leviticus chapter 6 that the altar, um, it was to never go out. It was always burning. So it was never allowed to go out. So that's where the seraphim got this burning coal from, was from the altar. Um, so, and then I have a note here that is talking about the glowing coal from the altar. So the altar sits inside the tabernacle, and from the little nugget thing I gave you last time on Thanksgiving, we know the tabernacle sits like in the middle, of the tribes. Anyway, there's a tabernacle not only here, but there's an exact replica of it in heaven. So the tabernacle is a model of the one in heaven, and that's why God told Moses to make it according to the specifications, because it is a model of the exact one in heaven. So the coal coming from the altar, from the tabernacle, quenches and cleanses Isaiah of his sin. So he's purged of his sin. Verse 8. Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And then I said, Here am I, send me. And verse 9, he said, Go and tell this people. So before I get into that, I want to go over here that Isaiah recognizes his condition. And first he's talking about, woe is me. Next he's talking about, hey, send me. And that's because God had purged his sin for him with that coal. And his condition, I have a note here that says, acknowledge your condition. That's all God wants us to do, is acknowledge our condition. He's talking about, woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips. And that's all he wants us to do, and then he'll fix it. He'll reform it, all right? All he wants you to do is to take notice of your condition. Confess it before him, and he'll cleanse you from it. So it's God's work that does the molding in our life, not ours. All right. Verse 9, he said, Go and tell this to the people. Keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Verse 10, Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and return and be healed. Okay, so God's trying to warn them of what's to come, and he's telling Isaiah that their hearts are hardened beyond repentance, and they won't listen to him, but he's sending him anyway. All right, and that is, God is so merciful. He's never going to bring down his judgment and not give us a witness, not let us know what is going on before he does it, because he wants to save everyone. So, verse 11, Then I said, Lord, how long? And he answered, Until the cities are laid waste and without inhabitant, the houses are without a man, and the land is utterly desolate. Okay, so he's asking the Lord, how long? How long is he going to have to go preach to these people and them not listen to him? So God's saying, I know they won't listen, but tell them anyway. So God's efforts are exhaustless in what he does for us. And so that this verse right here tells me that it's proof that no one will go to hell, not by accident. No one will go to hell accidentally. It will be fully intentional. God's efforts are exhaustless, and you can see that here. Again and again, he tries. Again and again, he sends a witness. Again and again, he He's going after his people and telling them what he's going to do if they don't change, and they don't change. So he always sends a witness. His efforts are exhaustless with us. So we're almost done. Verse 12, the Lord has removed men far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land, but yet a tenth will be in it and will return and be for consuming, as a terebinth tree, as an oak tree, or as an oak, whose stump remains when it is cut down, so the holy seed shall be its stump. So a tenth, holy seed, those are all clues that we're talking about the remnant, okay? The people that are left over of Israel, the Jewish people. So Israel's they're going to look in that day like an oak tree that's dead, but it's going to come back. All right. So, and I have a note here that sometimes God has to cut us down like an oak tree so that a new tree can grow from the old roots. All right, so that's 13 verses of chapter 6. There were a few nuggets in there. Still more to come. So we'll get into chapter 7 here soon. Bye. Good night.